Law of segregation and beyond. Law of segregation. A sperm or egg carries only one allele for each trait because allele pairs separate from each other during gamete formation. Mendel then experimented by observing two traits at a time, for example seed color and seed shape. He wanted to see if these different traits affected each other or not. In other words, did they behave independently of each other or not? Dihybrid cross. Mendel performed dihybrid crosses, crossing true breeding parents differing in two characteristics to determine whether the characteristics are transmitted to the offspring together or independently. When this was done, he found that the F1 generation plants all were the same, each having the dominant trait for the two characteristics. The F1 generation plants were then crossed, resulting in a ratio of approximately 9:3 to 3:1. 9, dominant in both traits, 3, dominant in the first trait, recessive in the second, 3, recessive in the first trait, dominant in the second, and 1, recessive in both traits. Dihybrid cross. The Punnett Squares were devised after Mendel, but let's use them to analyze a dihybrid cross and see if the predictions match what Mendel found experimentally. Cross a pea plant with yellow pods and yellow seeds, little g, big Y, with a pea plant with green pods and green seeds, big G, little y. Assume that the two traits are passed down independently from each other. Create a Punnett square that takes both traits into account as they occur together. The yellow pea plant contributes little g, big Y to the cross, the F1 generation, and the green pea plant contributes big G, little y to the cross. Dihybrid cross. Set up the Punnett square with the allele combinations from each plant. Such a cross predicts an F1 generation which is heterozygous for both characteristics, big G, big Y. All plants would have green pods and yellow seeds, the same phenotype. Dihybrid cross. Next, cross two F1 generation plants of genotype big G, big Y. Since we've assumed that the alleles for each trait are independent of each other, each plant would contribute 4 equally probable allele combinations: big G, big Y, big G, little g, big Y, and little g, little y. Set up a Punnett square for this assumption. Dihybrid cross. The Punnett square predicts the F2 generation genotypes. As you can see from this list, we have every possible combination of dominant and recessive alleles. Dihybrid cross. The Punnett square shows the predicted phenotypes, of which are only 4 types compared to the many genotypes we saw in the previous slide. There are 9 green pod yellow seed, 3 green pod green seed, 3 yellow pod yellow seed, and 1 yellow pod green seed. The phenotype ratio is 9:3 to 3:1. The Law of Independent Assortment. The Punnett square predictions match Mendel's experiments. Mendel developed the Law of Independent Assortment from his dihybrid crosses. Each pair of alleles segregates independently of other pairs of alleles during gamete formation. This Law of Independent Assortment applies only to genes on different, non-homologous chromosomes. Genes located near each other on the same chromosome tend to be inherited together. The Law of Independent Assortment. The alleles of one gene segregate into gametes independently of another gene's alleles. Think of this like a coin toss. If you toss a coin, what is the probability of it coming up on heads? Now if you toss a second coin, what is the probability of it coming up on heads as well? When tossing a coin, the outcome of one toss has no impact on the outcome of the next toss. Rules of probability. Mendel's laws of segregation and independent assortment reflect the rules of probability. Remember from math, the probability scale ranges from 0 to 1. An event that is certain to occur has a probability of 1. An event that is certain not to occur has a probability of 0. And the probabilities of all possible outcomes for an event must add up to 1. Using probability rules when solving genetics problems. There are 2 rules of probability that are helpful when solving problems in genetics: the multiplication rule and the addition rule.